Why does anything at all exist?
That question, why does anything at all exist, is an intriguing question. If nothing existed, the question would be, why does nothing exist? That would be an equally intriguing question, just as demanding of an answer, but of course, there would be nobody around to ask such a question. My point being that we should not assume that existence is more or less puzzling than non existence. The gentleman you just heard ask the question was the theologian William Lane Craig. He posed this question during a debate with Lawrence Krauss. During this debate, Craig offered an answer to this question, why does anything at all exist? Craig said that the answer is God. In defense of this answer, Craig presented Leibniz's contingency argument. Let's rejoin Craig.
Why does anything at all exist? Leibniz came to the conclusion that the answer is to be found in God, who is the explanation why anything else exists.
The simplified form of the argument, as Craig indicated, is something exists, therefore God exists. Of course, that simple form of the argument is not compelling. We will need a more fleshed out argument. Craig goes on to lay out a more detailed form of the contingency argument.
We can put Leibniz's thinking into the form of a simple argument. So, premise one, every existing thing has an explanation of its existence.
Okay, premise one holds that everything has an explanation for its existence. I'm not completely certain that this is true. In my book, Religion Refuted, I explain that we humans are endowed with an instinct to seek explanations. It's easy to understand why having an inquisitive nature might contribute to our species' survival, but I'm not sure that we can logically project this mental habit onto the cosmos. Just because we demand an explanation does not entitle us to an explanation, nor does it prove that an explanation must exist. Premise one is an outgrowth of human psychology, not a necessary fact about nature, or God for that matter, since if everything must have an explanation, so must God. There really is no end to such questions. Every parent has dealt with a child who keeps asking why. Human curiosity is unquenchable. Premise one would be much more straightforward and harder to doubt if it were reformulated as follows. We humans are psychologically compelled to seek explanations. I would agree that as a practical matter, we all do seek explanations when our car doesn't start, when our child is sick, when we are trying to understand some complex issue. In all kinds of everyday situations, we feel compelled to seek explanations. But that's quite different from premise one as presented by Craig. Premise one asserts that everything has an explanation of its existence. The difference between these two assertions is similar to the difference between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism. Methodological naturalism contends that, as a practical matter, it is worthwhile to seek natural explanations for events. That's what science does. That's what we also do in our everyday lives. Metaphysical naturalism, in contrast, insists that everything has a natural cause. Craig's premise one is likewise an example of a metaphysical claim that extends beyond what we can know empirically and therefore cannot be proven. It might be right, but it is far from certain. If premise one, the claim that everything has an explanation for its existence, were restricted to our everyday environment, I'd be inclined to agree with it. But when it is being postulated as an ultimate fact of reality, applying to the cosmos itself, we should be more reticent. It seems almost reckless to make a bold pronouncement about what must be true or must be false in realms so far beyond our experience. But let us see what Craig can say in defense of premise one. Maybe he can change my mind. Surely he will offer his defense momentarily. For now, of course, he's just quickly stating each premise. He is about to state premise two.
Two, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God.
Premise two is a doozy. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Clearly, we're going to require a convincing defense of premise two. Next premise?
Three, the universe exists.
Ah, a premise, finally, that I can promptly embrace.
Now, what follows logically from these premises? From premises 1 and 3, it follows 4, therefore the universe has an explanation of its existence. And from 2 and 4, the conclusion logically follows, therefore the explanation of the universe is God.
All right, the argument seems to be laid out in a valid form. If all the premises are true, the conclusion follows. I've already explained why I'm somewhat inclined to reject, or at least doubt, premise 1. I also mentioned that I am strongly inclined to reject premise 2. But if Craig can provide a convincing defense for these two premises, he will have established the probable existence of God. So let's hear his defense of premise 1 and premise 2.
If the atheist wants to reject the conclusion, he has to say that one of the three premises is false. But which one will he reject? Premise 3 is undeniable for any sincere seeker after truth. Obviously, the universe exists. So the atheist is going to have to deny either premise 1 or 2. So the whole question comes down to this. Are premises 1 and 2 more plausibly true or false? Well, let's look at them. According to premise 1, there are two kinds of things which exist necessarily and things which exist contingently. Let me explain. Things which exist necessarily exist by a necessity of their own nature. It's impossible for them not to exist. Examples? Many mathematicians think that numbers, sets, and other mathematical objects exist in this way.
As I explained in my book, Religion Refuted, numbers, sets, geometric forms, and such mathematical principles as the Pythagorean theorem do not exist necessarily out in some Platonic realm. Our human propensity to conceive such ideas is encoded in our brains. Our neural networks are structured so as to facilitate these ideas. Essentially, we have been imprinted via mutation and natural selection with mathematical faculties. Our ideas about quantities and geometric relationships aren't floating in some ether with their own independent reality. These ideas, all ideas as far as we know, arise from our brains, which are biological entities. No one has ever located any mathematical principle or any other concept anywhere except in a mind, and no one has ever encountered an unembodied mind. Math is in our heads. Now, it is true that our minds are imprinted by nature with ideas such as quantity, and so there must be aspects of our ancestral environment that served as the template for these ideas. This is empirically confirmed through the scientific study of nature. The operations of nature can often be expressed mathematically, as we know from E equals mc squared and countless other physical formulas. Math, like other abstract concepts, is concretely manifested by nature. Within our minds, mathematical principles seem abstract, but there's nothing abstract about how they appear out in the real world. Our abstract ideas describe in general terms what is exhibited by nature in very specific physical properties. So Craig is mistaken to cite the number 7 as an example of something that exists in and of itself, having no cause outside itself. The number 7 is an idea spawned by the firing of a web of neurons. The firing of the neurons that represent the idea of 7 has a physiological basis in the workings of the human brain, the structure of which is attributable to DNA, which traces its genesis ultimately to the survival advantage bestowed on our ancestors by their ability to think in synchrony with the operations of nature. Here's the problem. Craig still lives philosophically in the age of Plato and other pre-scientific philosophers. These were philosophers who supposed that when we think of numbers, we are mentally tapping into some universal ideas that exist somewhere in a mysterious realm. No, numbers have no independent existence. They exist as ideas in our brains, as generalizations about the workings of nature. Craig is right that the number 7 causes nothing, but he fails to recognize why. It's not because the number 7 exists in some Platonic realm, isolated or quarantined from physical reality. It's because the number 7 is a product of our neural circuitry. The fact that natural operations manifest quantity does not establish that quantity is something that exists necessarily, unless we want to say that nature exists necessarily, but the contingency argument holds that nature exists contingently. In any case, a number is no more or less contingent than nature itself. So much for the idea of self-sufficient entities. Now let's hear what Craig has to say about contingent entities.
By contrast, things that are contingent do not exist necessarily. They exist because something else has caused them. Examples? Familiar physical objects like people, planets, and galaxies belong in this category.
When Craig suggests that people, planets, and galaxies are not necessary entities, he is building the case that the whole of the natural realm is not necessary, that the initial quantum fluctuation that gave rise to the universe was not necessary. Craig is saying that all of nature is contingent, causally dependent on something else. Okay, maybe the universe did not have to exist. But maybe it did. How would we know? Frankly, this seems to me to be idle speculation, not sound philosophy. The origin of the cosmos really is a scientific question. Any answer we give is nothing more than a guess. Here's where we stand. We have heard Craig defend premise 1. He insists that everything has an explanation. I hold, in contrast, that it is part of human nature to seek explanations, but that this has to do with our psychology and may or may not reflect any deep truth about the cosmos. Craig has said that quantities, like the number 7, have a necessary existence, whereas I hold that the idea of quantity exists because it was bred into us by the regular operations of nature, which manifest quantities in concrete patterns. Craig has said that planets and other natural objects, including the cosmos itself, do not exist necessarily, whereas I think that such a speculative metaphysical statement amounts to blind guessing. Craig is not quite done with his defense of premise 1. Let's hear him out.
So what shall we say about premise 1? Well, if you reflect on it, premise 1 seems very plausibly true. Imagine that you were hiking through the outback and came across a translucent ball lying on the ground. You would naturally wonder how it came to be there. If one of your mates said to you, "It just exists inexplicably, forget about it," you'd either think that he was crazy or else he just wanted you to keep moving. No one would take seriously the suggestion that the ball just exists there with literally no explanation.
Craig is being a little devious here. He has the atheist respond to the translucent ball by saying, "It just exists inexplicably, forget about it." I have already described the natural curiosity that we humans have, how we seem programmed to seek explanations. No one, believer or atheist, is likely to dismiss a translucent ball as permanently inexplicable. Sometimes, in our quest to explain some phenomena, we come up empty-handed. There are plenty of mysteries in life and in nature. There are plenty of things that remain inexplicable, at least so far inexplicable. But when Craig has his hypothetical atheist blare that it just exists inexplicably, he makes it sound as though the atheist is denying that the translucent ball even conceivably has an explanation. That is a misrepresentation of the atheist position. Atheists do not say, for example, that the cosmos is inherently inexplicable. What they say is that we humans cannot, at least for now, provide an explanation for the universe. There's a big difference between saying that we cannot explain the cosmos and saying that the cosmos inherently has no explanation, that it just exists without a cause. What the atheists say is, we don't yet have an explanation for the universe. What Craig says, the atheists say, is that the universe is inherently inexplicable and uncaused. If Craig cannot recognize this simple distinction, then he should not call himself a philosopher. If he does recognize this distinction, then he should be scolded for deliberately conflating them so as to mislead his audience. Craig has more to say about the translucent ball.
Suppose it were the size of the entire universe. Same problem. Merely increasing the size of the object does nothing to provide or remove the need for an explanation of its existence. Something has to explain why it exists.
Obviously, Craig has switched from talking about a translucent ball to now talking about the cosmos. He is insisting that the cosmos must have an explanation. In essence, he is restating premise 1. Bear in mind that Craig has not yet provided a reasonable defense for premise 1. He is merely appealing to our natural instinct to look for explanations, urging us to project this psychological impulse onto the structure of the cosmos.
So it seems to me that premise 1 is more plausibly true than false.
No, psychological impulsion is not physical necessity. But let's move on.
So, what about premise 2? If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Is it more plausibly true than false? Now, at first blush, this premise might strike us as controversial. But in fact, atheists typically agree with premise 2.
Really? I don't think so. But you certainly have my attention.
For what does the atheist typically say in response to Leibniz's argument? The atheist typically asserts the following. A. If atheism is true, the universe has no explanation of its existence.
Okay, first off, Craig starts with the phrase, if atheism is true. Atheists never use such a phrase because it's nonsensical. Atheism is not a proposition that can be true or false. Atheism merely reflects a state of mind in which one does not think that belief in God is warranted. It makes no more sense to say atheism is true than it does to say skepticism is true, or that doubt is true, or that non-belief is true. Skepticism might be warranted, doubt might be warranted, non-belief might be warranted, and similarly, atheism might be warranted. But these are states of mind, not propositions that have a positive or negative truth value. Craig, like many religious apologists, likes to equate atheism with the statement that there is no God. While some atheists may be convinced that there is no God, atheism itself merely reflects the belief that the arguments for God are not sufficient to warrant theism. Taking this definitional correction on board, we could edit Craig's statement as shown here. Notice that I have replaced the phrase atheism is true with the phrase theism is not proven. This eliminates Craig's false definition of atheism. But statement A is still not quite accurate. Let's fix that. That's more like it. We have inserted a couple of more words. Now statement A reads, if atheism is not proven, the universe has no proven theistic explanation of its existence. This version of statement A accurately reflects what atheists believe. Of course, in this modified form, statement A is tautological. All it is saying is that atheists don't think the theists have made their case. That is precisely what atheists believe. That's why they're called atheists. Atheism does not entail the belief that no explanation exists for the universe. Atheism certainly does not entail the belief that the universe is uncaused. Atheists believe that whatever the cause of the universe may be, we don't yet understand it. Physicists can trace the history of the universe back to the quantum fluctuation from which the universe emerged. But beyond that, once you trace back to the Big Bang's earliest Planck second, things get mysterious. The fact that we do not currently have a full explanation for the universe does not mean that we never will. It does not mean that the universe is uncaused. We just don't know. We atheists admit that we can't at this point explain why the universe exists. And that really bugs theists like Craig. He wants us to accept his pet proposition that God created everything. Craig's whole defense of premise 2 rests on a fallacy about what atheists believe. He is conflating the two following statements. Craig has spent lots of time debating atheists. How he can possibly be this confused about what atheists believe, it baffles me. I have watched many of Craig's debates with atheists. Not once has any atheist told him that atheism is the belief that the universe is uncaused. Many atheists have told Craig that the universe is currently without a scientific explanation, or without a full scientific explanation. They have often expressed doubts about whether the Abrahamic God or other gods constitute a plausible explanation. But not one atheist has ever told Craig that the universe is uncaused or that it is inherently inexplicable. So why would Craig falsely attribute such claims to atheists? Well, he gives us a pretty good hint.
If atheism is true, the universe has no explanation of its existence. But this is logically equivalent to B. if the universe has an explanation of its existence, then atheism is not true.
Aha! He falsely attributes statement A to atheists so that he can reword statement A in the form that it appears in statement B. With our corrected definition of atheism, however, statements A and B are no longer logically equivalent. So let us now correct statement B to accurately reflect what atheism holds. If the universe has a proven theistic explanation of its existence, then atheism is unwarranted. In simpler words, if a theist makes a good case for belief in God, we should believe in God. Well, that's certainly fair enough. Do you suppose that Craig would go along with this? I doubt it. He worked pretty hard to twist and distort the definition of atheism so that he could end up with statement B. There must be some serious motivation driving him towards statement B.
And notice that B is virtually synonymous with premise 2. So when the atheist says that given atheism, the universe has no explanation, he is implicitly admitting premise 2, that if the universe does have an explanation, then God exists.
Wow. Okay. We know that statement B, as Craig presented it, is not something that atheists would accept, so his argument collapses. I don't want to be overly harsh, but the deliberate manipulation of definitions and the issuance of false claims about what his opponents believe has become one of Craig's trademark rhetorical strategies. For that reason, I am not surprised when he engages in these definitional contortions. Just a bit disappointed. What's really baffling about Craig's defense of premise 2 is this. Even if atheists did implicitly accept premise 2, as Craig claims, that would not constitute a defense of premise 2. What if we said that theists accept premise 2? Would that constitute a defense of premise 2? No, it would not. What if we said that all living Nobel laureates accept premise 2? That would also not constitute a defense of premise 2. Craig is committing the fallacy known as an appeal to authority. And ironically, he is treating atheists as his authority. I guess his thinking runs along these lines. If atheists accept premise 2, then certainly we theists are justified in accepting premise 2. But, as I've explained, atheists reject premise 2. Surely Craig is going to at least make some effort to come up with a plausible defense of premise 2.
Besides that, premise 2 is very plausible in its own right. For think of what the universe is. All of physical reality, including all matter and energy. It follows that if the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause must be a non-physical, immaterial being beyond space and time.
Buckle your seatbelts. Craig must be getting ready to say something very profound. He must be, because rather than defend premise 2, he has made the premise even more audacious. He is now saying that if the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause must be a non-physical, non-material being beyond space and time. I'm eager to see how Craig proves this claim. Ooh, I can hardly wait.
Now, only two sorts of things can fit that description. Either an abstract object, like a number.
Well, we already discussed some problems in Craig's Platonic view of numbers. In my book, Religion Refuted, I go into more details on this. Carry on, Dr. Craig.
Or else an unembodied mind or person.
No one has ever discovered an unembodied mind. This is pure fantasy. An unembodied mind is a fiction. If we're going to invent some fictional entity, why invent an unembodied mind? After all, minds are manifestly no good at creating a universe. We've never encountered a mind capable of creating a paperclip, much less a cosmos.
But abstract objects can't cause anything. That's part of what it means to be abstract. The number 7, for example, has no effect upon anything.
Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. I'm sure there are lots of people who were afraid that the cosmos was created by the number 7.
So it follows that the cause of the universe must be a transcendent mind.
So it follows from what exactly? Is Craig really saying that it follows from the fact that the universe wasn't created by the number 7 that it must be created by a transcendent, unembodied mind?
And this is what the theist typically means by God.
The theist typically means a lot more than that. He doesn't just mean an unembodied mind. He means Jesus Christ, hanging on a cross, answering his prayers, being all-knowing, all-powerful, all-merciful, and burning all the homosexuals, witches, and scientists in hell. But wait a minute. Perhaps you have noticed that Craig has expounded upon this idea of God, but he has not actually offered a defense of premise 2.
Thus, premise 2 also seems to be plausibly true.
What? No. We never got an argument for premise 2. All Craig said was the following. If the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause must be a non-physical, non-material being beyond space and time. And then he called this being a transcendent mind. And then he equated this transcendent mind with the Christian God. That's it. That's it. Is this all Craig is going to tell us? I mean, aside from reassuring us that we weren't created by the number 7, and besides the gratuitous misrepresentations of atheism.
Given the truth of the two premises, or three premises, the conclusion logically follows. God is the explanation of the existence of the universe. Moreover, the argument implies that God is an uncaused, unembodied mind who transcends the physical universe and even space and time themselves, and who exists necessarily. This conclusion is staggering.
Yes, it is. One would have to be staggeringly drunk to accept this conclusion based on Craig's presentation. I wish I could tell you that Craig went on to provide an argument, some kind of argument, in defense of his conclusion, but he did not. Instead, he stated the conclusion and walked away from the podium and sat down, to much fervent applause from the audience. I'll end this video, as Craig ended his presentation, with his summation.
I hope you begin to grasp the power of Leibniz's argument. If successful, it proves the existence of a necessary, uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal creator of the universe. And he is the answer to the question of why anything at all exists.
Don't talk like a knucklehead, you knucklehead.
ReligionRefuted.com